Hello, I am. Today we're diving into 5 memory hacks that will help you learn anything faster. We live in an era where we are constantly bombarded with information. Every day we're expected to learn new things and remember them. But sometimes our memory doesn't always cooperate. This is where effective memory techniques come in. They are not just for those who want to impress friends with trivia or remember every detail of their favorite book. They are for everyone who wants to make the most out of their learning experience. Whether you're a student cramming for exams, a professional keeping up with the latest in your field, or just a lifelong learner, these techniques can help you. They will not only increase your retention but also make learning more enjoyable and less stressful. Ready to supercharge your learning? Let's dive in. First up, meaningful learning. Instead of rote memorizing, try to learn in a meaningful way. Have you ever found yourself reading a page in a book, only to realize at the end that you have no idea what you just read? This is a common experience when we're not engaged with the material, or when we're trying to memorize it without truly understanding it. This is where the concept of meaningful learning comes into play. It's about making sense of what you're learning, rather than just memorizing it. It's about connecting new information to what you already know. It's about understanding concepts and ideas, not just facts and figures. Let's imagine you're learning a new language, say, French. You could try and memorize all the words and grammar rules, but wouldn't it be much easier if you tried to understand the language in the context of your own life? For instance, think of how a certain French phrase could be used in a conversation with a friend, or imagine yourself ordering a croissant in a Parisian cafe. By doing so, you're making the learning process more meaningful and relatable, which in turn makes it easier to remember. The same principle applies to any subject, be it mathematics, science, history, or even music. For example, instead of memorizing a formula, try to understand why it works the way it does. Instead of memorizing dates and events in history, try to understand the story behind them and their impact on the world today. Meaningful learning is not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's a journey of exploration and discovery that is unique to each individual. It involves asking questions, seeking answers, and constantly challenging yourself to understand more deeply. So, next time you're faced with a new piece of information, don't just try to memorize it. Instead, ask yourself, how does this relate to what I already know? How can I use this in my life? What questions does this raise for me? Remember, meaningful learning is about understanding, not just memorizing. Next on our list is repetition. Repeating what you've learned helps to make it stick in your memory. When learning new things, we often find ourselves forgetting the information shortly after. This is where the power of repetition comes into play. The act of repeating information over time helps to strengthen the connections in our brain, making it easier for us to retrieve the information later. Think about it this way. Imagine your brain as a vast forest, and each piece of information as a path through the trees. The more you walk down a particular path, the more familiar it becomes, and the easier it is to find your way. That's essentially what happens in your brain when you practice repetition in learning. Now, repetition isn't just about rote memorization or mindlessly repeating something over and over again. It's about active engagement with the material. You're not just reading the same page of a book 10 times in a row. Instead, you're reviewing the information, testing yourself on it, and applying it in different contexts. One of the most effective ways to implement repetition in your learning is through a technique known as spaced repetition. This involves reviewing information at increasing intervals over time. For example, you might review a new piece of information one day after learning it, then 3 days after that, then a week later, and so on. This technique takes advantage of the way our brains are wired to enhance long-term memory retention. Repetition also works best when it's combined with other learning strategies. For instance, you might combine repetition with visualization, creating mental images each time you review the information. Or you could teach the information to someone else, which not only reinforces your own understanding but also helps you discover any gaps in your knowledge. In conclusion, repetition is a powerful tool for learning. But remember, it's not just about mindless repetition. It's about actively engaging with the information, reviewing it, testing yourself on it, and applying it in different contexts. Repetition is the mother of learning, so don't forget to repeat. Let's move on to visualization. Creating mental images can make information easier to remember. Now, what exactly is visualization? Well, it's the process of forming a mental image or picture of something. It's like painting a picture in your mind. It's a powerful tool that can be used to enhance both learning and memory. Let's take an example to understand how visualization can be used when learning new information. Imagine you're studying about the solar system. Instead of just reading about it or trying to memorize facts, you could visualize the planets and their orbits around the sun. Picture the fiery surface of the sun, the red landscape of Mars, the icy rings of Saturn. The more vivid your mental image, the more likely you are to remember it. Another example could be when learning a new language. Visualizing the word in action can be incredibly helpful. Say you're learning Spanish and you come across the word correr, which means to run. Instead of just repeating the word, imagine someone running. You could picture a runner in a race, their heart pounding, sweat dripping down their face as they sprint towards the finish line. Visualization is not limited to just images. You can incorporate other senses as well. For instance, when learning about a historical event, you could imagine the sounds, smells, and even the emotions that people might have experienced during that time. This multisensory approach can make learning much more engaging and memorable. It's important to note that visualization skills can be improved with practice. Start with simple images and gradually move on to more complex ones. It may seem difficult at first, but with time, you'll find it easier to create and recall these mental images. So next time you're learning something new, try to picture it in your mind. Remember, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and in this case, it might just be the key to unlocking your memory's potential. Our fourth tip is to teach what you learn. Explaining information to others can reinforce your understanding and memory. There's a simple yet profound concept, often attributed to the Roman philosopher Seneca, that says, "While we teach, we learn." This is not just a philosophical musing, but a proven method that enhances memory and understanding. When you teach someone else what you have learned, you are forced to clarify your thoughts, sequence the information logically, and explain it in a way that others can understand. This process, in turn, solidifies the information in your memory and helps you grasp the subject matter more deeply. Imagine you've just learned about photosynthesis. You could go ahead and explain the process to a friend, a family member, or even your pet. Talk about how plants convert sunlight into energy, how they use carbon dioxide and release oxygen. The act of verbalizing this complex process helps you remember it better. You might also try this method with more abstract concepts. Say you've just learned a new mathematical theorem. To understand it better, you could explain it to someone else. You might use metaphors or everyday examples to make it more relatable and easier to understand. And don't worry if you don't have a physical audience. You can also teach what you learned by writing a blog post, making a video, or even talking to yourself in front of a mirror. The key is to present the information as if you were teaching someone else. An added bonus of this strategy is that it enhances your communication skills. As you strive to make complex information understandable to others, you'll find yourself becoming a better, clearer communicator. But remember, the goal is not just to teach, but to learn. Don't be afraid to admit when you don't know something or when you're unsure. Use these moments as opportunities to learn more and deepen your understanding. Remember, to teach is to learn twice. So next time you learn something new, try teaching it to someone else. You'll be surprised at how much more you remember. Finally, let's talk about mnemonic techniques. These are tools that help you remember information more easily. You might be familiar with some of them already, even if you didn't know they had a specific name. Mnemonic techniques are essentially memory aids. They work by making connections between new information and what you already know, transforming abstract facts into vivid, memorable images or ideas. For instance, memory palaces is a technique where you visualize a familiar place and associate different parts of it with the information you want to remember. Acrostics, on the other hand, are phrases or sentences created from the first letters of the words you need to remember. For example, "Every good boy deserves fruit" helps you remember the lines of the treble clef in music. Word games, such as creating funny or absurd images related to the information, can also be useful. So don't shy away from using mnemonic techniques. They can be a great aid in learning.